Hey, solopreneurs, Gabe here. Today we have Dr. Renee Thornton from Pathfinder Resilience. She is going to talk about the 8 dimensions on what it takes to be a happy, healthy human being. I hope you enjoy this conversation because I sure loved it. Renee, thank you for being on the podcast.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited. When we had our pre-call, your story was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get you on my podcast. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about, the 8 dimensions on what it takes to be a happy, healthy human being. But as I already led up to it, we got to hear your story. So Renee, take it away, please.
Well, I guess I have to go all the way back to when I was 14 to start explaining to people how I ultimately discovered what the 8 dimensions of being a whole, healthy, happy human being really looked like. So that makes sense. At 14, I was asked to leave my house. At 15, I was kicked out of my church. And at 16, I was asked to leave my high school. So I am a high school dropout who is now a PhD. And when I started this journey, it was being asked to leave my house was really as a result of the fact that I kind of grew up in this very small, tight knit religious community. I hesitate to call it a cult, but it was kind of a cult. Um, and the things that were happening in the cult were incredibly wrong. So I came forward with some information about my dad and two of my stepbrothers. And I explained that I actually told my mother that I was being sexually molested. And we went to law enforcement, and law enforcement in some areas did a great job handling the situation. And in others, it's a small community, everybody knows everybody. My dad was like a well-respected member of the church. So the men in the church all got together and they had this meeting, and the pastor said, this girl is saying things that are not true. So you all need to be very careful. They ultimately decided to ask me not to come back. Um, so, you know, after the whole law enforcement thing, there was like denial, denial, denial. No, I didn't do this. No, I didn't do this. I don't know what she's talking about. She's just mad because she got grounded. Like that was essentially the line for a very long time, that the stance that my family took. So my mother, she had 5 kids, and she ultimately just said, I can't afford to lose my like meal ticket or whatever you want to call it. So she stayed, and they asked me to leave. So I left. I mean, I was kind of okay with it because the whole situation was pretty untenable anyway, and I just wanted it to stop. So if leaving was what it took for me to not be abused anymore, I was willing to leave. And to be clear, like the abuse in my family wasn't just sexual, it was physical. I mean, my mother was probably the most physically abusive person I've ever known in my life. The woman could beat the crap out of anybody. It was incredible. We used to, as kids growing up, we would have this conversation amongst ourselves. Like at the end of the day, we all knew we were going to get a beating, and we would have this chat like, well, would you rather get beat by mom or dad? And dad hit fewer times but harder, and mom would just go absolutely crazy and beat you until she just had no strength left. So we always picked dad because fewer hits were a lot easier to handle. So the abuse was pretty pervasive, and it wasn't just to me, but I was the one who was always independent thinker and very outspoken, which my family hated. I mean, as a female growing up in this environment, you do not speak out against anything. You don't ask questions of authority. Children are seen and not heard. I mean, that's the way I was raised. And girls were meant for one thing and one thing only, and that was to be married off to someone to have babies and to perpetuate the species. Like literally, that was the reason for my existence in their mind. But in mine, I wanted more. I've always wanted more. So when I left with a backpack with a few belongings on it, and I just walked. And I walked down to this. We had a bridge in town, and it was cold and late, and so I just kind of like huddled underneath the bridge with my little backpack and laid down and just tried to figure out like what in the world was I going to do. I didn't have a whole lot in the way of friends because most of them were connected to the church. And so it wasn't something where I could just like call my best friend up and be like, so I just got kicked out of my house. Can I come hang with you? We were secluded so much that I was never really allowed to go to people's houses and didn't really have kinship friendships. So ultimately, it was our family, and everything was supposed to be kept in the family and handled within the family, and to a greater extent within the church family. So I just slept under the bridge. And it was a very long, very lonely, very cold, kind of intense night. I would say, if before I even knew what this meant, I would say it was kind of a dark night of the soul. I've heard of that expression since then. And that would, I think, explain how I felt that night, just really, really alone. And I didn't like it. And I didn't like being at other people's mercy. And I think for me, that was the thing. I woke up the next morning with just an intense amount of drive, not really anger so much, but just a refusal to let this beat me. So I started walking to the next town. It was a little bit bigger community. And I thought, well, I might be able to figure out a job or a situation that would hold me over because I was not liking being without a home. So there was a restaurant in town. It's called Elias Brothers Big Boy. And I love people in the Midwest, like we all know the Big Boy restaurants. There aren't that many of them left. I think there's one up in St. Ignace, Michigan that's still going, and there might be a couple others, but this one was still open. And so I walked into the restaurant, and it's early in the morning, and the manager's there, and I said, my name is Renee. I would like a job. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's washing dishes, like whatever. And he said, well, do you like people? And I said, sure, I like people. And he said, well, do you think you could be our greeter? Because we don't have a hostess right now. And I said, well, of course. So I would love to. So I started working as a hostess that day. And I was kind of like paying attention to the other waitresses, the people in the restaurant, all the workers. And the waitresses were, they were making some pretty good money. And I was like, ooh, I need that. I need me some money because, money makes the world go round and money puts a roof over your head. So I'm thinking to myself, how do I get to be a waitress? So I did the hostessing duties and I volunteered to stay for a second shift. And I'm watching the waitresses and the way they're engaging with the customers. And I'm looking at the menu a little bit. So I just boldly kind of walked over to the manager and I said, I want a waitressing job. And he said, you're not old enough for a waitressing job. And I said, age is nothing but a number. What do I need to do to get a waitressing job? And he just kind of leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. He's like, I'll tell you what, if you can memorize this menu and pass a test, then I'll consider you to be a waitress. I was like, all right, now I know what I need to do. So I finished the shift, grabbed the menu, took it with me. I actually went out back and sat down behind the dumpster because there's a light that shines down over the dumpster. So I used that light, the outside light, to read the menu. And I just studied that menu all night long. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of a test? Does he really have in mind? Is he going to ask me questions? Like, obviously he's going to ask me ingredient lists and what's on this and what's on that and how much does it cost? And I knew that, but I kind of suspected he was going to come up with something else, and I didn't really know what. So I just focused on memorizing everything. And I paid attention to the ingredients lists, and I started to try to think like a business person. Like, okay, so if I own this restaurant, what things would I really want my waitresses to know? And so I did. I spent all night long studying that sucker. And I went in the next morning. He pulled in and then went in the front way, and then I followed around because I didn't want him to know I was homeless. And so I went around and I kind of followed him. He's like, you're here awfully early. And I said, well, I'm ready for my test. And he was like, you have got to be kidding me. There is no way that you memorize that menu. And I just handed it to him and I said, try me. So he pours himself a cup of coffee and he sits down and he's like, all right, fine. So he's kind of course, all right, so tell me this. And I answer the question. Tell me this. I answer the question. And he kind of sit up a little bit and okay, well, tell me this. And I answer the question and I got them all right. And at the end, this is when I'm starting to get nervous because I know that there's a bigger question in mind. And he goes, all right, what dish on the menu costs me the least amount to make and gives me the biggest amount of profit? And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck kind of question is that? So I'm kind of going through, like, we cook in my family, like food is like the sixth love language to me. So like I grew up cooking and around food and around the dinner table. And I'm thinking to myself, we were poor as church mice. So what would we cook that must not have been too expensive, but is on the menu for a pretty good price? And I landed on it and I was like, spaghetti. And he goes, how did you know that? I was like, well, I don't know. So I got it right. And I got to start that day as a waitress. So I got trained to be a waitress and it was like I don't know, it was $1 something an hour, but you got to keep your tips. So I started, oh man, this is awesome. And I found that I really loved it. I love talking to people and I love to upsell people. And I like to, sort of identify the people who kept coming back. What did they prefer? And what could I recommend to them to try new? So I guess really, really early on, I had this brain for business, and it was not something that I knew about. Trust me, I didn't recognize that in myself for a very long time. But I just learned that the higher your bill at the end of the day, the bigger your tip. And that was a restaurant that didn't even serve alcohol. Um, so that only partially solved the problem. I mean, obviously, I'm making tips, which means I have cash in hand right now. But cash in hand right now doesn't mean a whole lot because you to rent a place, like that's a really big thing. You're 14 years old. Well, now I was 15 because it was 2 weeks before my 15th birthday when this happened. And so I probably spanned a couple of weeks where what I would do is walk across the highway to a little motel that was there. And I basically spent all my tips like paying for my motel stay. And the motel rooms were nasty. Okay. Like cleanliness being close to godliness in my world. I was cleaning more than I was sleeping, I think, for the first week. And then sort of thought to myself, well, if I could make an arrangement with the motel manager to let me clean rooms in exchange for staying there, then I wouldn't be wasting all of my tips on hotel stay. So I went in, had a conversation with the motel manager, and he was like a grumpy old curmudgeon, which most people were in that town. So it didn't surprise me. But he was like, how do I know you can even clean? And I said, why don't you go look at my room? And then you tell me if I know how to clean. So I was just full of attitude. Oh my gosh. I just can't even, right now I'm realizing like I was really full of attitude um, and confidence, I guess. So he walks down to my room and he's like, no, this room hasn't been this clean since we opened the doors. So he let me clean the rooms in exchange for my stay. So I would get up in the morning and I would clean rooms or I would do breakfast and I would come back and clean rooms and I would go back and do the dinner shift. So that was like my life. And ultimately, I started missing a ton of school and I couldn't even get to school because school was in the next town. So when I'd missed 38 days of school, I received notice that my peer council, they got together and they decided without asking me questions, without saying like, what's going on with you? What's happening in your life? I mean, the whole kind of community kind of knew because it's a really small town and everybody talks. So I had gone to church in the meantime. And when I got there, the pastor pulled me aside and said, we don't really think that you're a good fit for us. We want you to not come back. And I got to say, that was probably the most devastating thing I've ever gone through ever. I've been through a lot. And I think it hurt more to me to be told to leave the church than anything that I've ever experienced. So that was pretty tough. So when my peers got together and they were like, she's missed 38 days of school. What's going on with her? We don't know. She's a troublemaker. She's lying about her family. God only knows what she's up to. She's probably into drugs and alcohol, which I definitely wasn't. But that was the assumption. They were just like, well, we should probably just tell her it's not a good idea for her to come back. So they did. So the principal signed off on their decision, notified me that I wasn't welcome to come back to school. So I'm working full time and I'm working at the motel. And that gets really old really fast, Gabe, really fast. I mean, you're basically busting it for somebody else's benefit. And I have never been a fan of busting it for somebody else's benefit. So when I had a few minutes to really kind of think, and my brain's always processing. I got to say, that's like a part of who I am. I'm always thinking, always sort of looking forward to what's next. I learned that very, very young that, you don't get hired for what you're capable of doing today. You get hired for what you're capable of bringing tomorrow. So for me, I was like, do I want to keep bringing it tomorrow for someone else? Or is there something I can do that I can market my skills and make better money and maybe work a little bit less hard? So cleaning was really my thing. It's like I've always like, oh my gosh, in my house, it was meticulous or a beating. So we knew how to clean, every one of us. And so I just went to the community where I also know this thing about religious guilt. So there's a bunch of people in the church who were a part of that conversation. And as things kind of unraveled and the truth came out and they realized I wasn't lying, there was a whole lot of religious guilt going on. Nobody wanted to bring me back into the church, of course, because I'm a black sheep. I was speaking up. Who did I think I was as a young girl? Talking against authority, so they didn't like me, but they felt bad about the way they treated me. So I used that to my benefit. And I went to the little neighborhood where all those rich, fancy people lived. And I went door to door and I said, I am starting a cleaning business and I'm available if you would like me to come in and clean your house. Well, Gabe, let me tell you, I had a list of people who were like, oh my gosh, we all know them to be the cleanest people in the church. If she's going to come and clean and she only charges this much, I didn't even know how much to charge. So I was probably way undercharging, but I didn't care because it got me out of the motel faster, and that was the goal. So I started a business and it took me about 3 months before I built up enough clients who were very, very happy and recommending me to other people who were outside of the church environment to bring on another person. So then I kind of became like an independent contractor who was employed. I didn't know anything about taxes. I didn't know anything about how to do any of that stuff. I was completely ignorant of it. I just knew that I had more business than I could handle on my own. I could afford my own place. I could, hire somebody to help me with it. And I was building quite the little reputation for myself. And so I did. I like that was my first company that I started. And the first time I hired somebody, I wasn't even 16 yet. And it was a huge success, I guess, if you look at it through the lens of like huge successes for 15, 16-year olds. But in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't enough for me. There was no way that I was going to stay in that community, first of all. So for me, the next step was get the heck up out of this environment and test your mettle in a real business environment. So I waited until I was 18. I kept that business going and I did all that stuff. Then when I was 18, a little bit before I was 18, I made the mistake of trusting somebody and financially helping them. Well, they financially helped themselves to everything
Hmm.
I had, except I had $17. So here I was again, like going, oh, like, am I ever going to learn to stop trusting people or stop helping people, whatever? No, I still make that mistake today. But with that $17 in my pocket, I hitchhiked my way up to Mackinac City in Michigan, and I got a one-way ferry pass to Mackinac Island. Biggest tourism island, I think, probably in the country. They get about 1 million visitors a year. So I went across on the ferry and I get off and I walk to the main street, which is right off the ferry. And I just start looking to see like who knows what they're doing, like who's the boss, who's in charge. So if I could just convince that person to believe in me, like I can start this whole thing over again. I know it. So I'm watching, and then there's this fella, and he's wearing a nice yellow polo shirt, and it says Carriage Tours on it. And he has this really cute little hat on it. And I just sort of like marched right up to him and all of my like 5'4" frame. And I'm looking up at this guy who he's probably 6 feet if he's, an inch. I look right up at him and I said, I'm here to get a job. He goes, did you apply for a job? And I said, no, but I'm here now. So what do I need to do? And he goes, well, what can you do? And I said, I can do anything. He goes, okay, can you drive horses? And I said, what self-respecting Michigan girl doesn't know how to drive horses? I didn't know first thing about horses. I've never even been around a horse. I saw my dad get thrown off a horse once. That was about the best I'd ever, but boy, did I lie my way into this one. So and then he said, well, you obviously don't have a problem with your mouth. And I started laughing. I was like, nope, I certainly don't. He goes, all right, start tomorrow. You're going to give tours. And I was like, sweet. What am I going to give tours of? He goes, that's not my problem. So then he hands me over to somebody else. And this guy walks me up to a place where all the employee houses are. And so I stayed at employee housing. And then it dawns on me, oh my gosh, that tomorrow morning I have to go work with horses. I don't know anything about horses. I'm going to get laughed off the island. So I asked this guy, I was like, where are the barns? I just want to go visit the horses that I'm going to get to see tomorrow. I'm all excited, I'm totally confident. He goes right up the hill, blah, blah, blah. So I went up the hill to the red barn, the carriage tours barn. And I walk in and oh my goodness, Gabe, horses everywhere, everywhere. And they're massive and they're frightening. And I'm tiny and I'm going, I have no idea what am I going to do? What have I got myself into? But I am not backing down now because it's a full steam ahead mentality for me. So I'm walking around again, looking for someone who knows what he's doing. And I see this like crusty old cowboy. I mean, he's got like this raggedy old hat. He's super, super tall, looks like the Marlboro Man. He's got those boots that have been worn for probably 40 years because he's just now finally gotten them worn in right. And he takes one look at me and he goes, you have no business being in this barn. I was like, I know. His name was Neil Moore, lives in Wisconsin, and he's a horse trainer. And I said, I am in need. I need your help. And he was like, well, what in the world are you doing here? He thought I was a tourist. I said, I'm not a tourist. I start work tomorrow morning. I'm giving tours and I don't know anything about horses. He goes, how in the world did you get hired to do this job and you don't know anything about horses? You're a fool. And I said, no, I'm committed. So you can teach me everything I need because I know you. You know everything I need to know and you can teach me before tomorrow morning. Just let me not look stupid. He started laughing and then he looked me down, up and down. He goes, we're going to need some coffee. And he goes, when was the last time you ate? And I said, I don't know, a couple of days ago. So he called over to one of the stall hands and he said, go get us some food and some coffee and keep the coffee coming. And he kept me there all night long until my shift started the next day. And I learned what I needed to learn so that I didn't look like a moron on day one on the job. And I don't know, I guess that was kind of history for me because from there, I figured if I could get to where I was in that moment, there wasn't anything I couldn't do. And that's been my attitude ever since.
Wow.
Since then, I've started 1, 2, 3, 4 companies, a nonprofit. I'm an author. I've gotten 2 undergraduate degrees, 2 master's degrees, and a doctorate. Obviously, I went back and finished high school in a school for attitudinal children like me. Served in the military, and I don't know, I have a son. I am loving life. And today I help people. Like that's my whole goal is to help people learn that adversity is actually something that builds resilience. And without adversity, there isn't resilience. So resilience is not like a natural outcome of having to go through traumatic events. No, it takes attitude and tenacity and grit. And it's hard work and it's dedication and it's sweat equity. And it's all these things that you have to pour into your life because you believe you're worth it. And that's what got me really on the path of trying to understand what was it about me? Because there are so many people who've been through horrible things as children and awful experiences as teenagers and young adults and even as adults and loss. And I mean, just so much adversity in life. And there are some people like my little brother who couldn't handle it. My little brother went through a lot. He lived in my family for God's sake. So, he went through a lot, but his entire life, he was addicted to drugs. He was in and out of jail. He died very, very young, was murdered by We won't talk about them, but so he just could not handle it. He did not have the characteristics or the awareness or like the mental grit, that refusal to give up that I had. And I wanted to understand what made me different. And so I really started to dive into this multidimensionality about humanity. Like, what is it that made me healthy when other people who've gone through similar or even worse experiences or even less worse experiences, they can't seem to live life on life's terms? So that was kind of the catalyst, I think, to launch the rest of my life, being kicked out at 14 and speaking up against people who I was trained and taught not to. It kind of taught me that there's a whole lot of value in me. And once you discover that you're worth it, if you know how to address it, kind of a start here, there isn't anything you can't accomplish.
That's absolutely amazing. And you actually went where I was gonna go, is where did that resilience come from? But it sounds to me like it was just innate in you. Um, you were just, built differently than some of the rest of your siblings to be able to handle what you did, but then also have the wherewithal to go, "All right, well, the waitresses are make more money, I'm gonna make more money. This room is nasty, I'm gonna go clean this room, and I'm gonna see if I can go clean some more rooms." And then to have the balls, just pardon my language, the balls to walk up to a guy and tell him, lie right through your teeth, that you actually knew horses. And then the wherewithal to go have somebody convince that old crotchety cowboy to teach you. I mean, that is very impressive. And I just keep wondering, where did that come from? And I'm sure you're going to share part of that, where that comes from, in the eight dimensions of being a happy, healthy human being. So I think the best thing to do is just, I'm going to let you keep going. What are the eight dimensions? Let her rip, Renee.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm actually going to throw that back at you for a second, Gabe, because yes, there are eight. There are eight, but what do you suppose they are? I always like to ask people this question, like, what is wellness? And that it's an interesting answer in every different audience. But what do you think wellness is? What does it encompass?
Oh, I think wellness is encompasses everything. I mean, it encompasses your mind, like your mindset. It encompasses your physical, your spiritual. I think it wellness comes into even financial. It then goes into the other pieces of what I would say maybe friendship, spouses. We'll call that love, romance, whatever. And I think wellness comes into, like, where you what you do in this world. Like, how are you serving others? How are you showing up? I've got a couple others, but I think I'm maybe you and I are just meant to be talking right now, because I might have been checking off some of the lists, but those are the things that I come to mind when I think of wellness.
Well, you've hit on more of them than anyone I've ever had a conversation with about wellness. So well done. So you're right. It incorporates, it encompasses everything. And your physical system, like your physical body, there are systems inside that are designed to be early warning systems for you. But we are not trained to listen to our bodies. And when we hear them, we're just like, oh, suck it up. Well, that ultimately causes bigger problems. So, yeah, physical, the mental piece, we call that cognitive health. That's a lot of neural processing, like what happens in your brain when you get into any situation, any kind of stimulus. Emotional health, that has to do with the hormones and the way that we master those and learn to recognize early warning signs of need for a certain kind, or an overabundance of the kind that's bad for us. Then yes, absolutely spiritual. That has less to do with your religious affiliation and way more to do with your purpose in life and how well you connect into that. Your financial health, obviously, stewarding money, like that's a huge one that we're very frequently overlooked. Your social health, and that's all the relationship stuff, like you mentioned. Your professional health, that has to do with your trajectory. It's like, what am I doing with my life? How am I giving back to the world I am in, I'm a part of? And then the big one that was the huge differentiator for me, I think there were probably two, but the biggest one that has only recently been discovered, it's called psychological capital. So the psychological piece of wellness is all about your attitude. It's all about your attitude. It is all about the way you view your sight, yourself, and the world you function within, the people around you. Is it positive? Are you filled with hope? Like, are you a hopeful kind of person? Which means, like, are you action oriented? Do you look forward to your goals? Do you set goals? Do you reach for them? Do you get after them? How confident are you? How resilient and how optimistic? Like, that's what psychological capital is. For me, because the spiritual part was such a trial, the whole being asked to leave church, which was like, growing up in church with a faith foundation, it's rooted in your soul. It's just who you are. It's you've known from almost as early as taking breath that there's something more out there, that God exists and he is active in the world. And for a man who represents God, as a church leader, to say, you're not welcome anymore, most people would have taken that as God doesn't want me. But that is not the truth, because religion is not God. Religion is supposed to be a representation, but it's man. It's man-made. It was established by man to originally protect the wealth of the church. So religion is not God. God is totally separate. And I knew that instinctively. When he asked me to leave the church, I knew that God wasn't kicking me out of his family, but I felt terrible that I was kicked out of that faith family, because I felt it deeply in my soul that the pastor failed at his responsibility, which was to feed the flock, to care about the people. So that was pretty hard. But when you combine those two, between psychological capital and spiritual capital, and you kind of realize, in my case, I was a very goal driven, very goal oriented person who believed optimistically that things were, that I could affect positive change in my own life. And I was also connected with a relationship with God, which made me believe that I had a bigger purpose. That I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had one. So just knowing that was what kind of propelled me forward into being able to create a new world for myself, a new understanding, a new existence, and a new life. And that's what it ultimately took. So I would not be here today if I didn't have that relationship with God. And if I would have allowed men, in life, men, women, people, to derail me, or if I would have gotten into a mentality, which I've seen a lot of times happen, particularly in my family, was blame. It's so much easier to blame someone else. It's easier to say, well, my life is terrible because this person did this to me, or my life is awful because I don't go to church, because these people, I'm so sick of that whole churchiness. It's too religious, blah, blah, blah. And I don't do that. I don't play the blame game. It's easy. It's better for me. It's healthier for me to recognize that there are certain things that I can control and certain things that I cannot. And I focus on the things that I can. So when I started to kind of, grow up away from the environment that I had been raised in, I realized family is chosen. You don't need to be born into a family to have one. The military taught me that. Leadership is scary. Autonomous leadership is the most valuable asset a person could have, because you are single handedly leading your own life and you're accepting the consequences for the choices that you make. And once you get your head wrapped around that very real fact, there's literally nothing that you can't do. But there's also personal responsibility to frickin' do it. So you can't just sit around and be like, oh, woe is me. My life sucks. It's terrible, horrible. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't love anybody. Nobody loves me. Come on. You're not going to get anywhere. And we have way too many people who are resting in that. And then they're miserable and they're swimming in their misery until their fingers get pruny. And we're just so comfortable complaining that it's almost like being around energy vampires everywhere you go. So if you think about that, I haven't done anything spectacular. I'm just a very positive person, and positivity and excitement and enthusiasm, they are the most contagious characteristics a person can have. And so when I walk into a room, I'm happy because I'm happy to be there. I'm choosing to be there. And I'm grateful that I get to be there. And so that shines through in my personality. And, people are attracted to that. And so it's opened doors for me that other people probably have never even walked up to. But then again, I've never really met a door I haven't knocked down. So, yeah. Anyway, so yes, that's the spans the 8 dimensions of wellness. And, it took me a long time to learn what those were. I mean, when I started the work that I do, it was back in 2010. I I've identified 4. And then, with a little more research and reading more and broadening my scope, because when I first started looking at this, I really figured the world of psychology was going to have all the answers about what wellness was. No, they don't. They just have, 4 or 5. And then I started to look in the business world, and that's when I discovered psychological capital. And I was like, how in the world is business science, like business research, behavioral research, identifying things that the psychologists aren't? So that just blew my mind. So then I incorporated that one. And then I was like, well, how in the world can we be healthy in these areas and screw up our finances, which I've done so many times that it's like every time I turn around, I was making stupid financial decisions. But I've never really like been trained in smart money decisions. So for me, everything financial has been trial and error, and most of the time error and error. So so I'm like, how in the world can I be happy if I can't figure out how to master this financial piece? So that needs to be incorporated into that. Well, and then it's like the social piece, I've experienced and lived with anxiety for a really long time. And the anxiety that I feel, it is a direct descendant of the abandonment that I went through. And so there are certain social situations that I get into where I overcompensate or I withdraw. And I have to be aware of that. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So the social awareness and like social health, that's a really big piece of your overall wellness. And so I added that into it. So, over time, I've discovered that there are other pieces and parts that maybe are represented a little bit by some of them, but not significantly enough that they cover them completely. And so the model, which originally started out as something called the Heroes Project model, the model has since expanded to include all 8 dimensions of wellness, to include physical, emotional, cognitive, financial, spiritual, social, professional, and psychological. And that born or birthed the Navigating Adversity training program, which is something that takes every single one of these dimensions and treats it like capital, like financial capital. Because if you invest in yourself in each one of these dimensions, then you're building up capital inside of your own wellness world so that when adversity comes, and there's no way to avoid it because we can plan for some things, but we're always going to get knocked off that plan. When adversity comes, the more capital you have built up, the more it bounces off of you. And so navigating adversity is really all about building wellness capital inside of each dimension. And then by audience, we look at the most common adversities that they face. So, for example, when I deliver navigating adversity inside of a first response audience, I know the research tells me their top 5 adversities are depression, anxiety, occupational stress, organizational stress, and post traumatic stress. So, I'm looking at the impact of building wellness capital in each of these 8 dimensions on those top 5 adversities. And our research, like the research piece, is the most insightful, like most valuable part because it tells us that the more wellness capital you have built up, the less adversity hurts you. So it's like the only that I'm aware of, it's like a therapeutic training resource that teaches people how to live their best lives, and it works as a preventative. So it just makes sense that if you focus in on these positive, like developing these positive resources in your own life, when the negative stuff comes, it doesn't hurt as much. You can bounce back faster.
So how would somebody go about building up that psychological capital in some of those areas? Maybe give me an example or two if you would.
Okay, sure. So we'll take psychological capital. It's kind of the guiding light of all 8 because it's incredibly goal centric. So when you begin looking at the psychology of human behavior, it starts with, what do I want to accomplish? What is a significant success to me? And when you think about that, most of the time people will say, like, okay, well, something, a goal that I want to reach, I want to lose 10 pounds. Well, that's like everybody's favorite New Year's resolution, too. I want to lose 10 pounds, or I want to lose 20 pounds, whatever. And that's a good goal to have. But instead of just saying, I want to lose 10 pounds, you have to learn how to talk to yourself in a way that encourages a change of behavior, not just a deficit. So losing 10 pounds is like, okay, well, I'm going to cut this out, I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to spend time in the gym. And those are very like deficit mentality things. So I'm taking something that I really like out of my life. Instead, in order to encourage success, we have to remodel the way that we say things so that we reach for them easier. So we want to say, instead of losing 10 pounds, I would really like to fit into these, my favorite jeans. And you hang them up. So you see them every single day and you think to yourself, ooh, I just want to wear those jeans one more time and walk in front of somebody, the mirror, myself, who cares? But those are my jeans and that's what I want to wear. And what happens is you start to positively reinforce good behavior. So how am I going to do this? What's the first small thing that I can do that'll get me closer to getting into those jeans? Well, for some people, it's, I think I might just skip dessert just for a while. It's not a permanent thing. I think I just might skip dessert. Okay. Or I might change the dessert from something that's incredibly unhealthy to something that's healthy. And so you're making minor adjustments, and we call them small wins. And it becomes like a stepping stool or stepping stone to a really significant success. With every step, every small win, you get closer to your significant success. And along the way, you look for things that are obvious roadblocks. This is what builds resilience, is if you can identify the roadblocks that you anticipate hitting, like every Sunday I go to dinner with my family and there's like the best dessert in the world at that restaurant. I want that. I live for it. I'm not going to say no to that. I already know myself well enough to know that when they come around with that dessert, I'm going to eat it. So, okay, what can I do to either use that as a reward for myself or eliminate it altogether? If you plan to fail, or if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's true in this case too. If you plan ahead and you say to yourself, this significant success is so important to me that I am willing to do this, this, and this, and I'm prepared to do it. So much easier when you get around that table and you're just like, you know what, not really feeling dessert, because you've told yourself and you've incorporated some of like the mental prep work that we talk about in cognitive health. You use some of those tips and tricks and resources to get your mind right, if you will, before you're in the situation, and it makes it easier to navigate through. So when you're building psychological capital, it influences every single other dimension. So the higher your psychological capital, the higher your capital in every single dimension. So that's the one that we really kind of use as a guide to build resources in every single other dimension, because, who doesn't want multiplied growth, right? So that's just kind of an example. I mean, it's a tiny one, and I swear if I would be on here for hours if I like had to really talk you through. But the actual psychological capital lesson inside the training class is a little over an hour long, and I still feel like I could probably create another whole class that's at least 8 hours focused just on that dimension, and I'm working on it.
So I'm going to use that as a segue to basically make that transition to, the purpose of this podcast, which is, helping people master their finances. And so there's three, and you alluded to it a little bit ago, like part of that. I'm envisioning almost like a wheel or a pie with 8 slices, and then that financial quote unquote capital, or that financial wellness. And you had even said, I still have to figure out how to master my finances. And so I'm like, all right, that's a perfect transition. We're going to make this change to the 3 questions that I ask every single person that comes on this podcast. And the first question is what is the smartest thing you've ever done regarding money? And tell me that story.
Well, okay. The smartest thing I've ever done regarding money was to take a look at the cost of borrowing money. So, and this is not something that was ever taught, but I've bought cars. I don't buy a lot of cars. Like if I buy a car, I want to keep that car until it literally falls apart on the street. and then I will go and get another one, because they're so expensive. And so anyway, so I went and I bought a car, Chrysler Aspen. Now, I bought Aspen, and I named my cars, by the way. So we're just going to call her Aspen. So I bought Aspen in 2009. And when I bought her, I had just gotten rid of my Mazda. I had a little teeny Mazda, and I don't like, so I'm kind of like a control freak, and I like to be up high so I can see. And I'm also driving my son, and so safety really matters to me. So I wanted a vehicle that was like an SUV and I could see. So I bought Aspen. $24,000. And I was like, wow, what a good deal I got. Drove to Chicago. I actually took a train to Chicago, picked her out off of the lot, drove her home. I was so happy, so excited. I got this $24,000 loan from my credit union. I was like, yeah, finally, I am financially smart, doing something right. And a few months later, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so these payments are kind of a pain. I would really like to just maybe double up on my payments. So I called the bank and I said, "Hey, if I double up on my payments, like what kind of an impact does that have on the longevity of my loan?" They did a little calculating. She was like, "Oh, well, if you do this, this, and this, you could have this paid off in like 2.5 years." And then she said, "And you will have only paid some like ridiculous $33,000 or something for it." And I went, "Whoa. I will have only paid $33,000 for a truck I just bought for 24. What are you talking about?" And then she said, "Well, honey, don't you know you have interest? You're paying this much interest." And I was like, "Yeah, I thought what, wait a minute. What?" So I sat down with pencil and paper and I wrote out what I know now is like an amortization calculator, which I never saw, never thought of, never even considered in my mind. And I realized that this 72-month loan that I got for this $24,000 car was going to cost me half the value of the car. What the heck? So, I was not having that. That just ground against every bit of my soul. And I said, "All right, I'm paying this sucker up." So I got myself as another job because you can't just work one. So I got another job, and that every single penny that I earned from that job went to paying off my Aspen. And I had Aspen paid off within a year. And I still feel like I overpaid for that car because never again am I going to buy one that I can't pay cash for. Oh, best lesson I ever learned, but oh wow, that was just like that was honking wrong.
Well, and to give you a little bit of grace, it's not like you had any teaching whatsoever of interest rates, compound interest, anything like that. I mean, because generally, that comes up in high school. I mean, there's usually one class that it gets brought up in high school, and you didn't get that luxury to go through that. And so, and then the other piece that it gets taught from is your parents, and you didn't have that luxury either. So I'm going to give you a little bit of grace, and but I love that you looked at it and went, "Holy crap, this debt thing is not good." You are correct. I mean, debt can be used for good purposes and can be used, but it's also it you will pay more. So great lesson. Love that. Great lesson.
Expensive. It was expensive. That's what it was.
Well, not near as expensive as it could have been. I mean, you took the chance to go get a job to pay it off quicker. So, I mean, you got some grace with me there. So, nice job.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. So, let's go to the other side. What's the biggest money mistake you've ever made? And tell me that story.
This is all about emotions and the way that guilt can really wreck your life. I mean, really financially wreck your life. So, once upon a time, all right, long after I get out of the military, I'm raising my son. Um, Financially was pretty secure. Not great, but I was pretty secure. And then my mother, well, my dad actually brought my mother to my house, dropped her and her luggage off, and said, "She is your problem now." Now they'd been divorced. They were married 25 years, then they got divorced, and they'd been divorced for quite some time. Then she got swindled by this fella she married, and then he divorced her, and then when she got sick, so she started to have problems with fibromyalgia. And my mother was also mentally ill. She was an alcoholic. I suspect she probably struggled with some schizophrenia. So she was a hot mess walking, and she had a pretty terrible upbringing herself. So I can't say that I'm too shocked that that was ultimately what happened in her life. But when he brought her to me, this whole rush of guilt like landed in my soul. And I'm the only girl in my family. All of my brothers were basically had left the family. Now we haven't communicated in 25 years. So I don't really consider them relatives at this point. My little brother is the only one who was, and he passed away. So when he brought her to me, he basically said, "You're the strongest one in the family. You're the only one who can figure out how to handle this." And then he left. And I hadn't spoken with her in probably 5 years when she showed up that day. So I was not happy, but I was raised to respect your parents. And so I kind of dug into that. And unfortunately, I like gripped onto that. This is what God expects of me, to respect my parents. And so I provided for her, and I provided a home for her, which she hated and complained about every single day, because she wanted to live with me because she didn't feel comfortable living on her own. So, okay, fine. She came and stayed with me. Well, then she had all these medical issues and she didn't have insurance. So I am putting my financial well being out there to pay for her to see all these specialists so we could try to figure out what's going on with her. When she came to me, she was on 28 different prescription medications. I didn't understand why. I'm looking through all this stuff and I'm reading all this information. So I'm taking her to these different doctors and having them look into what's going on. Fibromyalgia is one of those sort of mystery diagnoses, very, early on, no one understood what it was. So there was a whole lot of time spent on her care, and it was all because I felt guilty for living my life independently of my family. And I just sort of felt like, as the daughter, it was my responsibility to care for the mother, because that's the way I was raised. As a daughter, it's your responsibility to have babies, then take care of your parents when they're old. And that's kind of where every decision I made, I guess maybe I was still trying to seek her approval and, get her to like me, which she never did. Um, I think there was a lot of jealousy, where she's so independent, she's so outspoken, she's so bold, she left the family, all these things I wish I could have done, and she really hated me. I didn't realize the extent to which she hated me until after she died, but even then, like, I could feel it. So I brought her into my home, and I cut down on my workload tremendously. And all I did at that point was I basically lived off my savings. I conducted the research that I was working on for navigating adversity. And I took care of her, and I paid for all these doctors. And at the end of the day, at the end of 4 years worth of days, I was bankrupt, literally lost my house. They foreclosed on me. Um, I had nothing. Like, I had Aspen. That's what I had, Aspen. Yeah. And my son, who at the time was 14. So I had a 14-year-old to take care of. I had to file bankruptcy. My mother committed suicide in his bedroom, and we walked in and found her. And that was like the most, I thought like my life had been pretty traumatic up until that point. But I sat down, they took her away, and I'm like sitting there in my living room. My son is in his bedroom, and not his bedroom, in a different bedroom because it was his bedroom. So anyway, but he's over there, and I'm sitting there realizing I just sacrificed all those years of independence and drive and business sense and, you know, financial everything. Like, everything I'd saved, I didn't do anything with it because I was always afraid to invest because I was afraid to lose it. And I didn't want to have nothing, because being homeless when you're that young, growing up with my dad made $2.14 an hour. We had 5 kids. We never had a thing. Being poor as church mice would have been nice compared to the way I was raised. So To me, I've always feared poverty, always. And again, I was sitting there in the lap of poverty and I was homeless again. Like, what the heck am I going to do? I have a child to take care of. I have nowhere to go. I'm being kicked out. Like, it was it was mortifying. The hardest thing I've ever been through, I think, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him too. And the worst financial the decision part of it that I wish I could take back was deciding to put all of everything that I did into someone else. And I didn't mean to do it. I didn't realize I was doing it. Like, I'm chasing approval, I'm chasing somebody to tell me that I'm okay, that I'm good enough, which never came. And I guess to me in my mind, I felt like it was worth it would be worth every penny of my money if somebody would just if my mom or my dad or somebody would say, "You're good enough." But it cost me all my money and I never heard the words anyway. So that was the hardest thing I've ever had to learn was sacrificing your money for someone else's benefit gets you absolutely nowhere.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, you pulled that one out of me because I haven't actually ever told that story before.
I have a gift.
Yes, you do.
I have a gift. So, and I gotta pause a second. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is powerful stuff, and that is something I have seen before. I have actually seen before people who have had a terrible upbringing, faced homelessness, and then they build themselves up and they start they start saving, and they're like, "Holy buckets! Do not lose my money." I and we're talking, people that I have worked with and I've observed that we're talking serious income, serious assets, but this fear of losing it that never leaves. And so that is one of the things that's a lesson I've picked up over time in working with clients. And so that's real. That's very real to you. And so I have to, for lack of any other way to put it, I just have to acknowledge that that's real, and that's okay. And thank you for sharing that. That was very impactful. Thank you.
Well, hopefully someone out there will be watching this and listening and maybe they're in a similar situation and I just like to me the lesson is you're already good enough. Your money that you've earned is yours and you have every right. Particularly women, listen to me. You have every right to that money. It's yours. So don't squander it. Don't give it away freely because I promise you giving money to somebody is not going to give you love in return. Like there is no way that's ever gonna happen.
That's fantastic. So we're going to change this to the mastering finances. So what does mastering your finances mean to you?
That's a great question. So, I have to say that when this all happened, I had to I am harder on myself than I am on anybody. Okay. So for me, I was like, seriously, you have created and developed this wellness program and financial wellness. You're a complete moron in. Who do you think you are trying to help other people financially when you have just screwed the pooch? So I was like, okay, it's time for me to get some education in this particular arena. Enter David Ramsey. Dude, I love him. So I just started to read his books, his materials, and listen to his advice, his podcast shows, and that has essentially become the foundation of my understanding of smart financial principles. To me, it's not enough to for myself. It's not enough to just budget. Like obviously I want to budget, but I want to pay down my debt. In fact, I don't want to have debt, period. So I take everything to an extreme. It's like you want to have a budget? Okay, fine. I'm going to have a budget and it's going to be a budget on crack. And if you want, no debt means no debt. So pay for cash for everything. So I kind of like went through this mentality where I went hardcore with it all and now I'm in a place where I'm starting to want to give advice to other people using my own bad experience to help them to avoid this similar situation. So then I went through I'm actually just finished up with the David Ramsey's master financial advisor or master financial coach. training course. So now I can actually help other people who go through the Navigating Adversity training program. In the end, they're like, I need some help with my financial coaching, but I'm a tough coach. So I don't know if anyone's actually going to want me around because I'm sort of like, really? You have debt? What are you talking about? You have debt. You can't afford debt. That's expensive. So I don't know that that'll actually happen. But to me, when I talk to people about their financial wellness, it's a couple of things. It's really just about stewarding what you have and making good choices with the financial resources that you have. And for most of the people who go through my training, they don't even know what those resources are. I have a lot of first responders who and professionals in corporate America who don't understand what the financial benefits that the company that they work for, what they actually mean. And so like that's part one, understanding what your financial resources actually are and putting them in the proper categories, and then looking at your budget, and then looking at your your debt ratio, like how much debt are you carrying, how much can you afford. When you make these decisions, most of the time what I end up talking to people about is the emotional decision making stuff. It's the I'm driven by adrenaline, so I'm making, I'm gambling, or I'm making emotional purchases because I don't feel whole in another area of my life. And so I'm buying new cars every 6 months or a year. And that's all incredibly dangerous. So for me, with my audience, like most of the people I work with, it has to do with that kind of emotional regulation and mastering the reason behind your financial decisions, which leads you to better financial stewardship.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. So you alluded to some of the things that you do and teach out there. So I'd like you to share. I mean, how can my listeners find you? What are the things that you're doing in the world right now? And then if there's some type of a promo or a download or something you'd like to share, please do.
Okay, sure. Uh, I am I guess I would say I'm in charge of a team of professionals who deliver this training program. It's called Navigating Adversity. We have it available for first responders. We have a new one. It's like an adjunct version that's for loved ones of first responders. We call it Keeping It All Together. And both of them are focused on building wellness capital in each of the dimensions and understanding the adversities that first responders are likeliest to face throughout their career. Then we have another version coming out in March or April for the corporate world, for professionals who are looking to build like a strategic success plan and take a whole life perspective of what wellness looks like. Then we'll have another version coming out for youth and young professionals in the fall. So, and then I'm ultimately by the end of the year hoping to release one that's for trauma survivors that really speaks to like the stuff that you go through and how it impacts your not only your wellness, but the decisions that you make about your wellness, because most of those are rooted in this belief that we're not good enough because of what we've been through. So that's navigating adversity is like it's the cornerstone of everything that I do. And so navigating adversity is the name of the program. My website is pathfinderresilience.com. Pathfinder Resilience is really it's a name that we came up with because it's all about each person's path being focused on building resilience intentionally. And that, finding that path is a little bit of what we do in navigating adversity. So pathfinderresilience.com is the website. Navigating Adversity for First Responders. The book is available on Amazon. Anyone's interested, they can look that up. Keeping It All Together will be available on Amazon by March 1st, and then the corporate version will come out. And then, like I said before, so as far as contacting me is concerned, you can email me anytime, Renee at pathfinderresilience.com. And we have different promotions that are available. It just depends on kind of the time of year and who our audience is. So I would just suggest going to the website and taking a look at what that is. And perhaps I can put together a special one just for your show.
Very cool. That'd be great. So is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think if I could sort of just say one thing to people who are considering making wellness a priority and financial health in particular, it's the biggest challenge or roadblock that I hear from people most often. It is where do I begin? I don't know where to start. I really want this. I do. I want to be healthy. I want to be happy. I want to be successful. I want all these things, but I just don't know where to start. And one of the coolest elements of what I do is before anybody even starts training with me, they complete this questionnaire. And the questionnaire tells me where they are right now in each of the 8 dimensions and which one they need the most help right now. And we're creating individual learning, like wellness plans for people based off of that readout. And so it's a whole lot to say this. There is a way to figure out how to start and to immediately feel relief. So start here with navigating adversity means starting where you need the help the most. And at the end of the day, the impetus behind getting there is making the decision that you're worth it. And trust me when I say you're worth it.
It's fantastic. It's a great way to end. Thank you for being on Solopreneur Money, Renee. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Well, solopreneurs, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Instead of 3 takeaways, I'm going to just highlight the 8 dimensions of wellness, of the areas that you need to be thinking about. Some of them you're fantastic at, and some of them need a little bit of work. Start to think about the areas that you can focus on in those areas that need a little work. The 8 dimensions of wellness are physical, social, financial, professional, spiritual, emotional, cognitive, and psychological wellness. Each of those areas can help you become a much healthier, happy human being. Renee also authorized a discount code. If you want to take any of her courses, just go to her website, pathfinderresilience.com or navigatingadversity.com. The discount code will work on both of those. The code is Solopreneur Money. Once again, the code is Solopreneur Money for 20% off of the pricing of each of the courses that she's going to have out there. Please take a minute to check those things out. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend. Truly appreciate you helping grow this podcast and sharing more wisdom on how people can master their finances and create the life that they want. Much appreciated. Have a great day.